Academic Goals and Instruction Improvement Committee will begin now.
Roll call. Dr. Beebe?
Here.
Dr. Beebe is present. Ms. Bofi?
Here.
Ms. Bofi is present. Ms. Bradford?
Present.
Ms. Bradford is present. Mr. Garvey?
Here.
Mr. Garvey is present. Mr. Gio?
Here.
Mr. Gio is present. Ms. Hill?
Here.
Ms. Hill is present. Mr. Lee?
Here.
Mr. Lee is present. Dr. Moranti?
Here.
Dr. Moranti is present. Ms. Orange Jones?
Present.
Ms. Orange Jones is present. Mr. Romer? Here. Mr. Romer is present. Mr. Wagasback is absent. Mr. Chasson?
Here.
Mr. Chasson is present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. First item. Okay. Okay. Your consent agenda is ready for approval, but we do have a comment card on item 2.1. It's at the board's pleasure as to how we handle that.
I'm going to speak for the board and say we all let her speak.
Oh, you passed. It's you.
Yeah. Okay, so that was just...
So consent agenda, which is 2.1 and 2.2. We will not add 5.1 as we have a comment for that as well.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
Who was the second, please?
I'm sorry.
Who was
Ms.
the
Orange
second?
Jones. Ms.
Okay,
Orange
second.
Jones. Sorry.
Can I ask a question about 2.1?
Surely.
I notice there are 57 school systems requesting a waiver. Is this a law? Isn't it a law that says they have to do it unless, I'm assuming the law says they have to provide the foreign service or courses unless they request a waiver and it's approved through BESE? Is that essentially what it is?
Mr. Lee, for those who didn't hear, are asked about a waiver. There is a statute that says that French education has to be provided for 5 years in elementary school. The statute also says that if a waiver is requested, the waiver must be provided. For whatever it's worth, I would also note that in this legislative session, a law was passed saying that if a critical mass of parents vote, that a French immersion program must be provided. So you got an awkward law where on one hand the service is required, but on the other hand, if a waiver is requested, the waiver must be granted. You have in front of you a list of districts that requested a waiver, but the board does not have discretion to turn down the waiver. Now, I would say this to Mr. Lee, if I could read into what you were saying. It's a large list of districts requesting a waiver from something that is a statutory requirement. And I should commend Dr. Beebe because you all are providing this service in St. Martin, I believe. So the one thing I would just ask your consideration of is that course choice conceptually is supposed to fill in these kinds of gaps, and so that's kind of why we'll be discussing that item later in the day. But
either that or we should be requesting legislation to not require it.
To not require it, yeah.
That doesn't mean it shouldn't be offered if somebody wants to do it, but shouldn't be required.
Fair point. Yep.
Any other comments? We have a proper motion and a second. Any opposition to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Next item is on page 5, item 3.1, consideration of a presentation on school district and state data storage. The department recommendation is to receive.
I need a motion on this, please.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
And thank you. We have a motion and a second.
Madam Chairman, I know that we have had, first of all, speakers with comment cards in all day on this issue, so I thank you all very much for coming. There could be others, but I really appreciate you all making the time. We committed at the last meeting when we were discussing this issue to come back with a presentation and really just to start a dialogue about student information, how it's stored, how it is secured, and how it is shared. And staff can hold on coming over until we call them over. If there are technical questions, they're more than welcome to come over if I call them to answer those questions. But this is just a general presentation. I'm going to take about 5 minutes and walk through it fairly quickly just in case it's informative for you and for the audience. And we were hoping that this would just help shape a dialogue. Maybe answers will come out of this, Madam Chairman, for today's for this topic. So if we could move forward, Bridget, with the presentation. First of all, why do schools and school districts collect data? They collect it for very basic issues like classes, like schedules, like transportation, like food, like handing out report cards. You need to know the names of your students, where they live, in order to do these basic things, and you got to store that information somewhere. States similarly have issues. They need to know the names of students to distribute money. They need to ensure that basic academic services like special education are provided. They need to test students and have the names of various students in terms of how well they did on various tests. So we as a state need to keep some indication as to which students are in the system as well. All right, so just talking about the history of this, I think it's important to note that previous to 1986, the state shared all records on paper. And I know that if you've been to a doctor's office or whatever, you're familiar with this transition as well. The state, previous to 1986, did all of this on paper. Now, starting in 1987, the state started to move toward taking paper records in from districts and converting them to digital. So it was like a big, giant fax machine. Literally, there was like a massive mainframe fax machine. You'd get a mailer in from a district. You'd put it through the fax machine. It would convert it to a digital record. And the state would keep it basically on these massive hard drives, huge computers, in an office in the previous State Department building. I know you all are very familiar with that building. Now, subsequently, the state then started in 1993 to exchange digital records with districts. No longer did districts send all of their records on paper to the state, and no longer did the district keep it as a paper record there itself. They started sharing, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, electronics back and forth. So what is collected by schools and districts? You have a list in front of you. Name, social security number, gender or sex, ethnicity, age, date of birth. This is an exhaustive list of the information that is kept standard by districts and by schools. If you look at the state list, you'll see the state list is similar but shorter. The state does not need to provide some of the services that districts do, therefore we don't keep as much information, but we do keep some so as to recognize the names, social security numbers, and so on of students across the state. And this is really what we wanted to share with you specifically. How does this exactly work? Schools and school districts, schools take in data. A child registers at a school, and the school enters the data in the district's system on a computer. That data go to the district, and the district then send those data to the state. The state keeps that information in a set of different databases. There's a scheduling system. There's a special education system. There's a finance system. So all of this information is kept in different databases. And then those databases are compiled into one system called leaders, which the state then keeps. So the question then becomes, how is this all secure? Well, when it was paper, it was hard to share, so that's secure in one sense, but obviously paper has a lot of vulnerabilities. It's just sitting there in a cabinet somewhere. It can be taken relatively easily, hard to secure. Digital storage that is stored on servers is easy to use effectively. In other words, it's stored in someone's office on a hard drive. And it can be accessed from multiple locations, but there are some risks of unauthorized access. And I think you started to hear in our last session a lot of concerns about that, about unlawful or unauthorized access to information stored on servers. So how is it that this information is protected? If it's kept on a server, how is it protected? Well, number one, the physical servers are protected by security systems, whether it be security guards, motion detectors, video surveillance, and recording. Confidential information is kept behind what are called firewalls, which are basically like security systems to make sure that no one can penetrate to obtain those information, just like you would have those kind of guards around a paper system. There are alert systems, and there are ways of tracking any attempted intrusion into these systems. In the event that information is shared, the department establishes an agreement with the organization with which it must be shared. Now, that could be a school system. For example, if St. Martin Parish needs to share information with the state, there is a private tunnel, essentially, that only the district and the state have access to. That tunnel is where the information is sent through, and it can be sent through real time, so that districts and the state can communicate, but the data are encrypted when it goes through there. In other words, they could not be used for other purposes, they can't be seen, they can't be accessed. They're encrypted through a security system when it does this. That would be the benefit, essentially, of having what's called a cloud-based server. Yes, you're using the internet, but you can create a secure condition where only two parties can share the information and it's encrypted, as opposed to, say, the mail, where you're mailing information and it has to go through all of the postal system and how vulnerable it would be in that system. A federal law governs what the agreement is between those two organizations. So say St. Landry or St. Martin Parish and the State Department, or say the State Department and LSU. If information ever needs to be served, this federal law called FERPA protects the privacy of all student and family records. Also, IDEA, the special education law, has specific protections for students with disabilities. And then there are laws within Louisiana that govern the degree to which anything can be shared from one party to the next. Every legal contract that is established around data sharing includes mention of these laws as they're applicable, and thus the contracts are enforceable according to federal statutes. On occasion, there is, as I've said, information shared. A school official, for example, might say, we want this information from the state, or the state might say, we want this information from a school district. Occasionally, a program like LA4, for example, needs to be evaluated. Like, the P-Card Center is evaluating LA4 over time. That requires a data sharing agreement. Occasionally, financial aid, such as TOPS, needs to be applied. So TOPS will share data with the State Department of Education. Sometimes a court might require information so as to enforce a court order or to create a subpoena. All of those agreements to share information are subject to this federal law. So we came upon an issue last time, and I'll wrap up our presentation, where you had a situation where essentially the state was saying, if we compile information, should it be shared with others so as to help teachers do their jobs? In other words, should you be able to share information from this general repository back down to teachers to help them do their jobs? And that's really what the debate last time was about, essentially, is sharing information that the state gets from school districts back with teachers about student performance so as to help them do their jobs. Now, one thing that I've learned over the last couple of months, and I thank some of our guests here for members of the public for prodding in this direction, is that a lot of this has been shared in, it's not stuff that's known about by many people. And I think it's important to bring it out into light. And I thank my colleagues like Kim Nesmith for helping us do that. We're not suggesting here today that this is a perfect process or that this is an exhaustive list of answers, but we wanted to provide this framework, and we hope that we can get to a time when the public understands, trusts, and has validation that this work is being done in the right way. And so this is just the start of this dialogue today. So, Madam Chairman, I appreciate the time, and we will open it up for comments or questions, obviously from the board as well as from commenters. Thank you.
Board members, are there any questions or comments? Mr. Lee?
Before there was a question about who was going to store the data. Are you now saying it's stored in the department?
Everything that I just mentioned is a State Department run system. Now, there may be private vendors who support and maintain those systems, whether it's for a school system or not, or for the state, that are on contract. So in other words, a database may be operated by, like maintenance, for example, by a private company. But the only people who have access to the information would be authorized State Department officials. And I think that issue came up. We're not a technology company. We don't run a database. But we can be the only ones that have access to information within a given database.
Any other members?
Yes, I have a comment. The superintendent mentioned that this is the beginning of a dialogue on this issue, and I'm glad to hear that, because a lot of the speakers that were here a couple of months ago talking about this database issue came from Slidell and St. Tammany, and so it's an issue that's important to me. And I would like to continue the dialogue and go a little bit further and amend the motion to receive so that it includes the creation of a task force to look into all of the items related to this. So if now's a good time, I'll introduce a motion to amend. Okay.
So we have a substitute motion on the table. Do we have a second?
Yes, I'd second that motion.
Ms. Bopey,
Well,
second.
let me go ahead and read it.
Okay.
Okay. I move to receive the information and also to direct the department to propose an information task force made up of experts from a variety of fields to recommend to the board and the department a means of validating districts and state data storage, security, and sharing practices.
Ms. Bopey, do you agree to second?
I still agree.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear the superintendent's comment.
I think it's a good idea. And if I take it to be, it is that the task force would study how it is that we could say that all of this is done in the right way. Is that
I think that's, yes, exactly what the words would indicate.
I think that's a good idea. I do think that we need someone at some point to say, whether it's a school system or whether it's the state, yes, they're doing this the right way.
If there are no further comments from the board?
I have a question.
I'm sorry, Dr. Bibby?
I wanted to talk more about the report and the arrangement, Mr. White, regarding In Bloom. And I think, it's pretty much obvious that there is the lack of trust for this administration. And I think that moving forward, I appreciate the fact that Mr. Garvey is recommending a task force, but once again, I can't, as a BESE member, I can't ignore the fact that we entered into an arrangement with In Bloom without this board being unaware. At least this BESE member was unaware. And, I wonder how long, what was the term of or the length of the arrangement? When did we become involved with In Bloom? Also, with regard to the concerns noted throughout the nation, specifically New York, I tuned into a webinar, a town hall meeting, and concerns were noted that In Bloom, it was the data system was built, supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and other entities, and that states would then come on board in 2015, whereby there would be a charge anywhere from $3 to $5 per student, and then the states would take on that responsibility. So I would like to hear from you regarding my concerns regarding the arrangement with In Bloom, the reason why you did not feel it necessary to inform this board of the arrangement.
Superintendent White?
Well, there's nothing in the law or in the regulations that say that every time the department shares information, it needs to come to this board. I think what I'm suggesting to you is, I think there should be greater levels of transparency. That's why I'm here today to present. I learned that very clearly from the last meeting, and I want to build trust in this process, and that's why I came to present here today. We had information in the In Bloom system for 5 to 6 weeks. I heard the concerns, and because we really weren't deriving much benefit out of it, we just removed data out, and now we are where we are, and we're back to square one with this presentation. So if we have a task force, and maybe the task force is the one to say, this is a good database, this is not a good database, this is a good way of securing it, this is not, I'm more than open to that. I think that's a good idea.
I support that.
Any other comments? Ms. Badby?
So, and I don't think that this has to go in the motion, but what I have in mind, and I'm not sure that it exists out there already, because I think that our use of technology has outpaced our policies, and it reminds me of like the medical profession, is that every time you go to the doctor, you have to sign a privacy policy and those kinds of things. That I think that there should be some kind of standards that we as a state adhere to and that our local districts adhere to where we make sure that we're using data in a way that's secure and we're using it responsibly to inform the decisions that we make, and that would also protect our students. So I'm not sure what the task force work will ultimately look like, but I would hope that they would come out with some kind of recommendations for us that would be some kind of standards that we could follow, that in each time we're making decisions about data, that these are the standards or these are the principles that we would adhere to.
Thank you, Ms. Badby. Any other comments, questions? We have a number of cards from comment cards. Lee Barrios. Jason France. Excuse me, before you start, I'm going to remind everybody that the hour is late, the comment cards are venti. So please, let's try to stay within the time limit.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. My name is Jason France. I'm a parent, and I used to work at the Louisiana Department of Education in the data collections for the last 8.5 years. Professionally, I've been in IT for about 15 years, and since I started programming when I was about 7, I'd say I have about 33 years in information technology exposure. So with that in mind, I'd like to discuss some of these things that Superintendent White revealed to us today about technology and some of the concerns that I have for this. For one thing, Superintendent White was asked to provide a contract related to In Bloom as to the nature of our agreement, our contractual agreement. This was provided a few days ago. I just had access to it a few hours ago. One of the things that I think has not been clear that I'd like to have cleared up is that according to the contract that I saw, unless there is a material breach, a willful breach, the In Bloom contract between the state of Louisiana and In Bloom is in effect until December of 2014, and that in order to cancel that contract, a certified letter has to be sent to In Bloom, and it takes 90 days from that point in time for it to be canceled. I don't believe that's happened. So Freedom of Information requests have been submitted, and to date, nobody from the department has revealed that no such letter was sent out. So while Superintendent White has revealed that the data was withdrawn after being on there 5 weeks ago, for 5 weeks, we still have some XML files that I had possession of that were released that define how that data can be sent to In Bloom with the press of a button. That data is off the database temporarily, the contract is still in force, and that data can be sent back at any time. I don't know if the parents and the children realize that, but when this is no longer on anybody's radar, that data can be sent back and the contract is in force. Nobody's terminated it. There's no opt-out for parents. I've sent a letter to Superintendent White about 6 months ago, perhaps. To date, I asked for a response. I have not received a response from Superintendent White that I asked for my child's data not to be shared with In Bloom, as per FERPA. I would like a response today if my child's data was shared. I know that a number of other parents sent responses to the Department of Education asking their information not be shared. I have not heard that any of them have had a response either. So that, okay. And I'd like to know what the purpose of In Bloom is, because either it's for a complex dashboard that we're going to send lots of information to, or it's just out there as a bait for hackers to get a hold of. Recently, Living Social, which is a cloud-based technology that is owned by Amazon.com, which is providing the InBloom database, was hacked. 500,000 accounts were withdrawn, were hacked, and all the information was stolen. So this, there is no reason to share this information with InBloom. The school districts have their data for a reason, and when it's in one time, all these little silos, it's not easy to get it. When it's on individual records, it's not easy for someone to make off with 3 million different files that we have right now with Louisiana school children.
Thank you, Mr. France. We appreciate your comment.
And just because Mr. France has made his concerns known in a variety of formats, including a blog that he writes.
Thank you for noticing.
I will, hard not to notice these days, my friend.
Thanks.
I will share a couple of just quick thoughts. Number one, I'm happy to send a letter to InBloom certifying that we don't have a contractual relationship any longer. I'm fine to do that.
I'd like to see a copy of that one, too. Thank you.
If I could just finish. We have sent plenty of correspondence to them back and forth indicating that we no longer have data in their system. If you think that'd be helpful, we'd be happy to do it. Staff, if we could please take note of that. Second of all, if we could track down Mr. France's letter and provide him some indication as to the response. I think probably because that was a letter that most of the text of which was a form letter received, in many cases, perhaps it was treated as a form letter when it came into the department, and we'd be happy to respond to your individual case, and I thank you for raising it. Third, I do think one thing that is just important that you as an education technology expert and others wrestle with is that I don't quite agree with your last statement about how school districts need their data, but what's the purpose of InBloom or another system like it? We're not partnering with InBloom, but if you remember that last slide that I said, how do we get information to the teachers to use in the best way that they know how? Most district learning management systems can't do that. In other words, a teacher can't look at their students' performance on test scores, and they can't look at their students' day-to-day progress. And that's really helpful for teachers to have if they're going to help their kids do better. So I would take issue with that. I think your cautions are right on the money, but I might take some issue with the question of what good is it. I think that system may not be the one for us. But we do have to make sure that, as in any other job, whether it's medical, whether it's education, that our professionals have access to student information in a way that helps them serve them without, I agree with you, compromising on security, and we'll figure that out.
Do you mind if I respond to that?
Please.
I was in charge of the Leaders Project, or at least a portion of it, related to all the data collections which you talked about. The Department of Education, despite what you mentioned earlier, does contain databases and does control and monitor them. And part of the reason for Leaders was to be able to share this type of information so that we contained complete control of it with a unique student identifier called a GUID, and that all this information didn't have to go to these third-party vendors, whether they're EdFi, whether they're InBloom, or anybody else. So my concern is that we had that ability. We got a $4 million grant from Education Statistics to do this, and we didn't use that for that purpose. Now we're looking at these other vendors, which will cost maybe $3 to $15 million annually, where the grant for the entire warehouse that we have was $4 million.
And I certainly regret that work didn't happen in that time before I was here. But I would say this: the GUID, which is a universal student identifier, is, I think, a very important reform. It may be the result of Mr. Garvey's task force that there's a recommendation that GUIDs be a common practice here, which should remove us from using Social Security numbers and other more common identifiers. And so I appreciate the suggestion. I think it's right on the money.
If you need somebody on the task force, I'd be happy to volunteer.
Thank you, Mr. France.
Thanks so much.
Lee Berrios.
Lee Berrios, retired teacher, St. Tammany. I should take much more than 3 minutes, but I have written something down. While this is being billed as a win-win for students, teachers, and parents, it's nothing but a marketing ploy, as Ms. Beebe said, financed right now by Bill Gates, but later to be financed by charges per student in districts. It's a ploy that will exploit our children and our taxpayers for financial gain by private corporations. All stakeholders have had and continue to have the knowledge and capability and accessibility to educational materials and services they need for students about whom they're most knowledgeable. It's the job of the corporation to sell the product, so to speak, or to provide or market the product, not for the public with taxpayer funds to pay the marketing agency or the corporation to provide them with this material or to do their advertising for them. I filed a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request 5 months ago asking for information regarding a well-documented agreement between LDE and the Shared Learning Collaborative until last week, over 5 months, when my FOIA was finally properly responded to, certainly due to a successful lawsuit filed by a local journalist. Superintendent White denied any such agreement and refused to provide, even to BESE, a written agreement. That is the biggest problem that we have. That has proved to be a lie, and now the public has no trust in LDE and no reason to believe that this data sharing scheme could possibly be to their benefit. Now, Superintendent White, you're hiding behind the very law that the public has brought forth as their protection from this privacy intrusion, FERPA. While you are perfectly willing to supply personal student data to an outside company, you have withdrawn formerly published school performance score data from the public with the excuse that it is protected by FERPA. Fact is, Superintendent White, you circumvented BESE policy, which requires any data collection, storage, or sharing plan to be approved by BESE. BESE was not aware themselves until it was brought before you by the public that this arrangement had been made. Now the Electronic Privacy Information Center, EPIC, has filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Ed for its covert weakening of FERPA regulations to accommodate this new data sharing scheme. We, quote, "We think it's a very serious threat to student privacy," said Mark Rottenberg, President and Executive Director of EPIC. "Once the data gets out there, it has all sorts of ramifications. It weakens the FERPA structure Congress put in place because Congress understands that a lot of student data can be stigmatizing, keeping people out of jobs, for example." A federal lawsuit filed in federal court in Washington by EPIC states, contrary to the agency's contentions, Congress itself articulated specific reasons
finish up, please.
for precluding non-educational state agencies from accessing, altering, or storing records containing personally identifiable information. Superintendent White, when I did get finally the response to my FOIA 2 or 3 days ago, and reading through the contract that you in fact did have, that you denied that you had with the SLC or in Bloom, it stated that in order to make any changes or withdraw from that contract, it was a formal legal contract, as you just stated, that it requires a written request sent by certified mail. You denied to the, if I'm not mistaken, to the newspaper.
You need to wrap it up, please.
I am. You denied to the newspaper that there was any type of correspondence to that effect. Now you're saying that you're willing to provide one, I guess, that you'll make. So all of these things make for very little trust in this circumstance.
Thank you, Ms. Barrios. Our next speaker is Grant Barker. Pass. Cedric Barker. Rachel Sachs.
Hi. I would like to say that while I understand that you're looking at this as a business opportunity and also to protect our personal data, I would also like to let you know that there is some emotional things that could happen from this data sharing. I would like you to understand that what may seem inconsequential to adults could be devastating to teenagers. Being a teenager is hard enough without the added stress of the spread of private information. Also, suicides could happen from this because a lot of the data that we don't want spread could be spread easily, and also hackers could easily get to it, as Mr. Jason said, because it is in a cloud. And parents will also put more pressure on their children to increase their performance and to hide their disabilities because they don't want their children's disabilities to be shown as much because it could affect them in the long run when looking for a job. I would not like the suicide rates to increase, so please don't share our data.
Thank you, Ms. Sachs. Debbie Sachs?
BESE is supposed to be good stewards of our children's education. We elected you to govern state education policy with us. We did not elect you to surrender our children's data to a centralized authority or cloud vendors. I sincerely hope that those of you appointed by our governor see the danger that this poses to our children as well. At the end of the day, if children should be molested, suffer from depression, anxiety, experience mental breakdowns or worse because all of their private sensitive data strewn all over insecure cloud servers such as InBloom and EdFi attached to disclaimers, whose fault will this be? Is this what BESE would want for their own children? Is this the legacy that BESE is to leave our children? A lifelong trail of data that will follow them forever. Did any of you on this board grow up with all of your private information strewn across insecure cloud servers? The answer is no. Louisiana's children are being used as guinea pigs with almost certain tragic outcomes. Parents in St. Tammany Parish recognize this and no longer want to give sensitive personal information to the schools. Parents who have already relinquished data on children with ADHD, dyslexia, are furious that this type of data is to be shared, which has the potential to negatively impact their children's future forever. In order to withdraw student data from InBloom, Mr. White, you would have had to have made a formal written request. Have you provided that formal written request to this BESE board or anyone else?
Thank you, Ms. Sachs. Angela Alef?
Superintendent White, thank you for your presentation. I do think it opens up the dialogue, and I'm going to revisit just a couple of things that I had spoken about before, but I do have additional questions and concerns. On your presentation, I noticed on the list of things that are collected on students, it ended on the left side with assessments. The problem with that for me is that as parents, you know, definitely with the NAEP, we're not allowed to see the assessments. Parents are supposed to be able to, if they can find the supervisor of the testing in our state, to be able to view the state testing. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to see park testing. I don't know. But a lot of information, from what I understand, is gathered on the kids about their values and their beliefs and their demographics, for instance, on the NAEP. And so when we add just assessments, that doesn't really give people the full picture of what may be included. And of course, we don't have the full picture because we're not allowed to see it, although the rest of the world evidently can. I mentioned the tripod survey the last time, and you explained that the state board department has nothing to do with that coming from my parish. But, and I could be wrong on this, but my understanding on the measures of effective teaching, that is where the tripod survey is also included, and our state did participate in that for a few years. So, you know, if I'm correct, then, you know, to say that the state isn't in the practice of collecting our students' values and beliefs, a record of that would be incorrect. As far as the agreement, you know, from what I've looked at the law, it says that only BESE can enter into any agreements and contracts. In the last meeting, you mentioned that the department did, and it was interesting to me in playing the video back that Mr. Romer, you had you evidently had seen the contract, because you very adamantly responded to one person by saying that's all that's on that agreement. So I'm assuming, I took that to mean that you know exactly what's on the agreement, and I'm just wondering why you, if you have the agreement or know where it is, or Superintendent, why that hasn't been provided to us as citizens.
Anyone who has issued a request for, there's no contract, because there's no money that's exchanged hands, or there's an agreement, which I believe Jason suggested that we send a formal letter to end. I've sent letters to them to end. He wants me to send a certified letter to end. I'd be happy to do that. But there's an MOU, and the department enters into MOUs with organizations all the time. But a contract, you're right, would have to go through here. There's just an MOU.
But what I read in the law says that would include MOUs that BESE would have to approve. And so that concerns me. And also, I appreciate that you would send a letter, but I still, as a citizen, as a parent, as a taxpayer, I want to see the contract. I want to see the agreement. I want to see.
That'd be fine. If you provide your information to my staff, we'll be happy to send you the agreement.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mr. Lee, thank you for your comments. We appreciate it.
I only have a couple more.
Very quickly. Your time is up.
I came from Miro, and I'm very active in this
Go ahead.
situation. The law also says that BESE is responsible for everything related to data collection. So I'm still confused on the point I had asked you about before, that if the parishes are entering into these contracts for data collection of different kinds, surveys, whatever, how is BESE then overseeing that as far as the information being shared with vendors, which we did establish was happening? I also find it interesting. I don't look at FERPA. I don't look at the national news. I mean the national laws so much because, I don't know, you might have heard of the NSA. But I look at the state laws more so, because I'm hoping that we're providing more protection for ourselves here in the state than the feds offer. And what I found was that as parents, there's a certain process we have to go through to access our own children's information in certain regards. Yet there's not that reverse process where vendors or other interested parties have to go through the parents to access their own children's information. And I just think that that's a backwards kind of system, and I'm not sure if you were aware of that. So I think that's pretty much all of my concerns.
Thank you, Ms. Lilly. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
James Finney.
I just want to briefly make a comment that it's a double standard when the Department of Education appears to be sloppy with data that truly should be confidential, yet they use FERPA as their excuse to do what somebody mentioned, which is take spreadsheets of long-standing off the website, round numbers to the nearest 10, making them much less useful than ever, and refuse to supply documents when properly requested. In particular, I've waited 2.5 months for a meaningful response that would let me reproduce value-added scores, and I'm still waiting. Thank you.
Thank you. Wayne Free.
Wayne Free, Louisiana Association of Educators. One of your staff persons had to check with me because they were a little concerned that I was speaking in favor. And she did a wonderful job. I'm speaking in favor of the motion to study the process very effectively. That is critical. I'm a strong believer that the ability to disaggregate and aggregate data in ways to learn things is very important. I do have concerns when I read the InBloom website, and I mentioned this last time. InBloom enables a wide range of applications to use student data more efficiently and effectively with the ultimate goal of unleashing innovation in the marketplace. And that is a concern that I have when they say it that way. And then they give a list of the companies that they are working directly with, including K-12, virtual for-profit, and a number of others. I think we have to study it. We have to look very carefully about how we can aggregate the data in ways that do not identify individual students, but then look at and get information to it to make decisions. Whether we do that in the marketplace is a very different idea. So I do think it makes sense to study that in depth.
Thank you, Mr. Freed. It's a good thing we're no longer with In Bloom, I'm presuming, from your perspective. That ends our comment cards, and so we're back to our motion. If you would repeat the motion, please, we'll vote on the motion. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Beebe has a comment.
Superintendent White, I still go back to the comment made that there was no financial obligation. And to me, that is somewhat surprising that there would be no cost to BESE. And so you're saying there was no cost, that we did not pay anything to In Bloom for the storage for the time that they collected and stored the data. That is correct. And I also want to point out to you, and again, addressing the trust factor and the respect for all BESE members, I made a request following the last BESE meeting. I received the copy of the Memorandum of Understanding on June 10th. And this is somewhat of a concern to me because, and I'm not saying that I'm superior to anyone else in the public who makes the request, but I think as a BESE member, I should receive some degree of respect from your office.
You have our highest respect, and I apologize if you did not receive it. Mr. Bradford, if we could make sure that Dr. Beebe receives the copy of the...
I did receive it June 10th.
Oh, you did? Okay, got it.
June 10th, but I made immediately following the BESE meeting where this discussion took place, I requested a copy of the Memorandum of Understanding.
Got it.
And I received it on June 10th.
Thank you. Would you please repeat the motion?
Gladly. The Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee recommends that the board receive the presentation on school district and state data storage and establish an information task force composed of experts from a variety of fields to recommend to the board and to the department a means of validating district and state data storage, security, and sharing practices. And that was made by Mr. Garvey, seconded by Ms. Bopey.
And may I amend to include Jason France, because I was very much impressed with his technical knowledge.
I really appreciate that comment, Ms. Beebe, but we'll have to leave that to the chairman of that task force. But we'll certainly pass along that recommendation from you as a matter of the record. We have a proper motion and a second. Any objections to the motion? Hearing none, the motion carries. Next item.
Next item is on page 20, item 3.2. Consideration of a presentation regarding student location and accountability. The department recommendation is to receive.
Members, I recognize the hour is late, so I will try to be brief with this, although it is a... Oh, excuse me,
I'm sorry, we need a motion.
I make that motion.
Second. Thank you. We have a motion and a second from Ms. Bopey and Ms. Orange-Jones. Superintendent.
Thank you. I apologize, Madam Chairman. I will be brief. If we could just move through this. We were asked by the legislature and by some board members to present on policy associated with student movement to affect accountability. And I think it was raised by articles in East Baton Rouge. But someone else today mentioned another case, a shadow schools accusation. These all kind of fall under the same genre of when students are moved and there's an effect on accountability. Our accountability system, as this first slide says, measures schools based on how well a school's students achieve. It does not measure how much academic progress a student made from one year to the next. For the most part, that's not how our system is done. Now, this came up at a Senate education hearing during the legislature. Let's move to the next slide. When there was a debate about, between the superintendent and members of the Senate Education Committee about plans in Baton Rouge to move students. Now, I don't know for certain what the motivations of a school board are to move students, but it was noted in the committee that there are schools that are AUS 3 and likely will be AUS 4 next year that are being proposed to be reconstituted because they would be eligible for state takeover. And you have gifted students moving into some F-rated schools, you have F-rated schools being closed down and turned into pre-K centers and so on, and this generated the controversy. Now, I will tell you, I personally am highly suspicious of this. I don't think it's probably the best thing for kids if it's done by reasons of accountability. I've talked to Superintendent Taylor, and we disagree on the issue, and he's allowed, of course, to say what he thinks his motives are. And I should also say that this is not breaking any rules. This is perfectly within the law and the regulations. What we were urged by the Senate Education Committee to share with you were thoughts on how it is that this could be essentially prevented, this kind of any attempt, whether this is one or not, to try to achieve a higher accountability score by just regrouping your kids rather than by the kids achieving more. So let's just look through. So how can you move schools and get higher scores but not improve student achievement? As I said, the system is based on the total scores of the kids in the school. If you were seeking to game that system, whether that's happened in this case or other cases or not, you could simply regroup kids in your schools through magnet programs, through closing down schools and opening up new ones, through starting programs, in order to create a higher score. You could move kids from one school to the next in order to create a higher score. And for many, then it would appear that you have a, quote, good school. Even though no one's learned anything more or less, you've just moved them. We have made some attempts to try to change this over time. And we provided you a case study of how actually you could have a situation where you have a school that's making tremendous progress but still has a relatively low letter grade versus a school that's not making much progress and has a high letter grade. And so this is, at least an instance where the Senate had urged us to explore, in this instance of movement, what is behind this, and is there any way that we can try to stem the instinct to move kids for the purposes of a higher accountability score. I don't want to walk through those two schools with you in great detail, but it's worth you just having the case in front of you. I'm sure you saw it in your previous materials. We've started to make a movement in this year's accountability toward recognizing student progress rather than just overall how well did the kids do. We have a bonus this year at high schools and elementary schools that says if you really make progress with your lowest performing kids, you can get a little bit of a bump. Other states have taken this further, and we are not here today to propose to issue any policy. We're responding to what the Senate committee thought we should be considering. But if you look at Arizona, for example, schools receive a letter grade that is half based on the progress that the students made and half based on the total score. Not like we are, which is almost all based on the total score. The same is true in Colorado, where you have multiple factors, but you see that growth is an equal factor. And so when we were prompted by the Senate committee to consider what is happening here and this phenomenon of whether it's happening anywhere else, I think it's fair to say that in various ways, school systems across the state, breaking no rules, breaking no laws, do group kids and sometimes see some benefit from that in their letter grades. And if we wanted to change the underlying cause of that, it would have to start with, rather than awarding letter grades solely on the basis of the total performance of kids, instead, at least partially, as these states have done, rewarding it based on the progress that students have made. Ostensibly, that would take away some of the incentive, if there exists that in the state, to move kids because it wouldn't much matter which school they were in. It would just be a question of how much the student moved that year, how much they grew. So we wanted to share that in response to the Senate's urgings. You should know that the Senate removed its bill so as for us to have this discussion. We told them we would just prefer to have this discussion with you. They removed the bill, and so here we are sharing this discussion today. I appreciate the time for the presentation. Madam Chairman, happy to answer any questions.
Yes. Superintendent, question about this. I think this is such an important conversation, certainly relevant to my district when I think about the amount of growth and progress that many of our schools have made and how that often isn't reflected in the current SPS scores. And I think that has created some confusion in the public, particularly amongst parents, in trying to make really good decisions for their kids. So this is a very important conversation. I'd be curious to know how much, when you look on aggregate across the state, how much you have that comparison, school A to school B. Have you done that for many schools? Meaning, we just started to look at growth for all schools. Would we be seeing a radically different story? Does that question make sense?
Well, the way to do it is, and Mr. Free has made some comments to this effect to some degree.
Yeah.
The way to do it would be if you look at the value-added scores,
Yep.
just as one proxy, and you base it on school or district rather than by individual teacher, and you would see a different story. And actually, interestingly enough, this parish has very high value-added scores. Just as an example, sometimes in their low-income schools, sometimes in their higher-income schools, but they have good value-added scores. So if you were to look at that as a way of measuring it, you would see growth differs from letter grades. Yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, first I'd like to start off, East Baton Rouge Parish is the district that I represent. And when the model was presented to me, I was truly impressed with what the board came together and the superintendent. Now, Superintendent White, I've listened to you in reference to your presentation and throughout today. And a lot of the information that you have said, you have really contradicted yourself. Because when you look at the Recovery School District, we do this all the time. Move students from one area to the next area. You took Carver Elementary School, moved into Benjamin Mays, which was a failing school, took those students and moved them into that school. Both schools were failing schools. And you took those students and moved them into Benjamin Mays School and then closed Benjamin Mays down. Now the students are scattered everywhere in New Orleans. Some of them still don't have placements of what schools they're going to attend. So when the superintendent presented this plan to me, I thought it was an excellent plan. And what they have done have taken what the state has modeled and just implemented it into their district. And I think that if we're about the children, if it takes that we have to move some students into one area to get resources and the academic piece that they need, I think we need to do that. And when you look at the RSD as a whole, you guys are doing it all the time. And even when you look at the growth, and I always have to disagree with Ms. Jones on this, and she talks about the growth in New Orleans, but the students are still failing. They're still not performing to what we as a state have made the standards, even some of the charter schools. So I just wanted to make that point in reference to, and I would encourage all districts, if you can, to look at this model closely and see what you can do, because if you don't, the Recovery School District is going to come in and take over your schools, and then guess what? They're going to continue to recycle the schools. So I thought it was a great plan, and I think that as a board, we're trying to give autonomies to the local school districts, so allow them to do what they need to do to make sure that the students succeed.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Dr. Beebe?
And just as a follow-up, isn't that what we advocated today and approved, that we move Landry into Walker? So what's the difference? I mean...
well, do you want to know what the difference is?
Please.
The difference is that there you have a school where there's no building, and the same is true with Mays. Here you have a situation where you have Delmont, which is about to be eligible for state takeover, and there's a plan to close it down, send every kid to a different school, and turn it into a pre-K center, which doesn't take tests. At Claiborne, which is about to be eligible for state takeover, you have a plan to remove every student, to turn into a lab school for gifted kids. At Mayfair, which is an F-rated school, you have a plan to move 100 high-performing gifted students from Glen Oaks Park into Mayfair. There does seem to be a pattern, and if we could maybe just turn back to the slide that indicated the movement. whether it's intentional to the reasons that Ms. Hill mentioned about avoiding state takeover, there's a lot of movement that has nothing to do with a school not having a building, like Mays didn't have a building, or Walker, we don't have $40 million to renovate it after a hurricane. This is something different. There was no hurricane, there were no trailers and any of this stuff. So I beg to differ on the difference. Now, I don't know what their motivations are. I'm not a board member. It's true that at a board meeting in the paper, there were board members on record saying they did it so as to avoid state takeover. But I can't say for certain what the motivations are. What I'm saying is that we have to ask ourselves, why would one be motivated to do this in the first place, no matter what his motivations were? And I think part of it might be survival.
Yes, think outside the box. Do what you have to do to be successful. Isn't it about student outcomes?
Or is it about RSD?
I think part of it might.
It's about RSD takeover. Come on, put it on the table.
That's it.
Part of it might be
That's
that
what it is.
we're not rewarding progress in the way that we need to, and we should look at that.
I'm saying if they're successful, I don't care how they attain the success, other than cheating.
Thank you, Dr. Beebe. Anyone else have questions or comments? Yes.
I don't want to get into all the rhetoric. I mean, I think there's a question that has been brought up by numerous people and bodies, which is, are there elements to the accountability system that we have in place now that would allow for gaming of the system in some way? It's highlighted by incidents in our own backyard where, in fact, the statement was made that kids were being moved for the specific purpose of avoiding takeover. Now, to me, that's gaming the system. Now, the question that we must ask ourselves, is there a better way to not create that incentive, to reward growth of students, so that no longer would be a temptation? That's, I believe, what we were presented with today. Is there a way to do this to avoid the temptation of gaming a system rather than trying to achieve results? That's the question. I think it's a relevant question. I think the legislature has asked us to ponder that question. I think that's why it was presented to us today, which is, should we consider, and there have been several advocates who have not always agreed with this body or with me, who have suggested that perhaps we ought to consider growth in addition to the raw score. And there's evidence that suggests that we ought to consider that, and I think that's what this presentation is about, is what are we really trying to do? Figure out how to beat a system. Are we trying to figure out which schools are educating our kids best? And you can go to schools that may have a lower letter grade now and find out that they're doing remarkable things. You can also go to schools right now that may have a very high letter grade and find out that there's not much growth going on. Neither instance is necessarily rewarded with the system we have in place right now. And that's the question, is can we do a better job of rewarding every school that does the best it can with the students it has, rather than how do we move kids around in order to achieve a certain letter grade. So I appreciate the report. I think there's a lot more work to be done here. The consideration of should we alter school performance scores? Should we consider growth to some degree? You've given us an example of other states that have done that. So, I mean, I think it's a very reasonable thing to do for us to consider, which is, what are we going to reward? Are we going to reward actual growth, or are we going to reward how we group kids? We ought to reward the growth.
And Mr. Roma, I'll have to say, in reference to what you just said, me and you don't usually agree, but I agree. And I think you need to start with the superintendent and the RSD, because they have set the foundation. When you say gaming the system, RSD have gamed the system. When you look at some of these charter schools.
I'm going to respectfully
No.
disagree, because
I mean, and we look at some of the charter schools,
Excuse
you have
me.
the same exact thing going on. So
Ms.
now
Hill.
you want to penalize the district because they have backdoored you guys and doing the same thing that you're doing, and you want to criticize them. That don't make you no better than the rest of anybody else. And that's all I have to say.
With all due respect, there's been more academic growth in the RSD than any district in the state, and it's not even close. Now, that doesn't mean it's done. It does not mean the work is done there.
Thank
But-
you, Mr. Romer.
Thank you.
Mr. Guillot is next. Mr. Guillot?
Yes, I'm going to offer an amended motion. Do you have public comment?
I do.
Well, I can do it after the public comment.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other comments?
I just want to say, with regard to the charter school, mission focus, what is that? That's selective admissions, and it's called competition, Mr. Roman. That's what you're about. This is what this school reform is about, competition. Well, what do the athletes do when they get out on the field or on the court? They compete. They do what they have to do to win.
I'm not certain what that reference is.
Well,
If you want to open the door to competition, you're looking at the man that's ready to open
You're
the
the
door.
one, I'm taking
Okay,
your
I respectfully
words.
ask you to please stop. This is not being productive at this moment. We have a lot of comment cards, so let's please
disheartening, Ms.
see to
Bradford.
I understand, but could we have a lot of people that want to speak, so let's hear from them, and then if you have something to say, we'll certainly come back to you. Jason France. Did Mr. France leave, I believe? Okay. Lee Barrios.
You lose your religion.
Lee Barrios, retired teacher, St. Tammany. It's both interesting and predictable, this situation. When the state is, and I chose exactly the same words, I already had them written down, when the state is gaming the system, it follows that districts and schools are going to play that game. Superintendent White, I don't know why you referred to my comment about shadow schools as an accusation. It's not, in fact, an accusation. It's a known fact. The school districts themselves that are doing it admit to it. There are many ways to manipulate the system. One of them is changing the metrics every year to the school performance score. The whole value-added teacher evaluation system is a game. Magnet schools, accelerated schools for low performers, having legislation to that I believe you supported, Ms. Superintendent White, to move school district power from school boards to the superintendent. And guess what? Mr. Taylor picked up on that right away. And he's actually stolen your gun, and now he's shooting you with it. The question is, which one is more offensive? I do have a specific, though, question as to if this board does have any power or effectiveness, and it seems to. There's one school that I'm familiar with, in particular in East Baton Rouge Parish, that's been closed, Delmont Elementary. It had a 3-year, was awarded a 3-year SIG grant, a federal grant, several $1 million. Had an excellent teacher, National Board Certified teacher, who was the East Baton Rouge Parish Professional Development Coordinator, and she gave up that position and offered to take over that school that was going to be closed, to take it over and transform it, got the SIG grant, wrote it, got it, was in the 2nd year, and Dr. Taylor chose to close that school, which my conference with the U.S. Department of Ed said they don't interfere with local district decisions, because I thought that would be a waste of federal money to have all of that wasted. Is there anything that this board can do to prevent a situation like that, if not now, in the future?
Thank you, Ms. Barrios. Barbara Freiberg.
Is there anything that this board can do? I think that's what the discussion is about.
Asking the question, but this is unfortunately not a question and answer, and I'm sure Mr. White will get back with you for that. Ms. Freiberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak. It has been my wish since I ran for East Baton Rouge Parish School Board to bring East Baton Rouge Parish closer to the state. And I have done everything I could to attempt to get us to work more together. I do believe we have been successful in many ways, and obviously this is a situation where we have not been. I was president of the school board at the time that the Family of Schools process and program and proposal was made. Superintendent White, his staff, we met with them month after month on this. I thought we were in agreement as to this community of schools proposal. Obviously, we were not. There are some mistakes in what Superintendent White said, but he got Marydale and Mayfair mixed up, and that's understandable. But I would like to say that there have been reconsiderations at the one school where there was the most consternation about moving a magnet program into Marydale. That has been reconsidered and will not happen, is my understanding.
I too would very much favor a value-added system to judge how students are achieving, because you probably don't know, but East Baton Rouge Parish has been in the top 10, I think even in the top 5 in student improvement during the past 3 years. So, you know, we are working very hard to work with the state and to work with the teachers and the schools in our district to make a difference. And I appreciate what you're doing. I would encourage the value added, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Freiberg.
Bradford, might I make one quick comment?
Sure.
And just with the challenge with value added. I mean, that's why it's a question. That's why it's not an answer here today. Is ultimately you do have to achieve. I mean, ultimately, our students do have to reach the level where they can compete in a modern marketplace. And so that is an ultimate goal. But getting there, there are certainly steps along the way that value added has merit. But what makes it complicated is it can't be just value added. At some point, the accountability system has to value that did we actually achieve the ultimate goal, which the ultimate goal is a student who's college and career ready. So value added, that's why it's not as simple, here's the presentation, and here's how you mix in value added into the overall school accountability system. And that's why it was presented to us today merely as, here's some thoughts on perhaps a way that we can improve a system that has some holes in it. So I appreciate the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Romer. James Finney.
Unlike Mr. White and Mr. Romer, I was at the school board meetings where many of these decisions were made, probably all of them, many of which I disagree with, but that's kind of beside the point. This scribble drawing that's on the board is insulting to the intelligence of everybody in East Baton Rouge Parish. It combines things that don't have anything to do with one another. Belfair Elementary changing its mission, I think, was a stupid idea, but it has nothing to do with gaming the system. So that addresses your arrows pointing to Melrose and Capitol. Sharon Hills Elementary isn't in the discussion at all. I think Delmont Elementary shouldn't have been screwed up, and it wouldn't have been if it weren't for the fact that the RSD is breathing down the neck of the East Baton Rouge School District, threatening to take every last stinking piece of property that they can possibly get their hands on. And all the students run away, going to the decent schools that are run by the duly elected local school board. Your arrow drawn from Glen Oaks High to other schools has nothing to do with accountability. It has to do with the middle school students that have been housed at Glen Oaks High at the request of parents needing another place to be put. Glen Oaks Middle is an RSD school that is not acceptable in its current form to enough students, and so those kids have to go elsewhere. But let me get to the main point of this, which is that Mr. White has basically stated, and Mr. Romer has confirmed, that the current state accountability system is bad. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It's a horrible instrument to use to close schools. It needs to be dumped and replaced with something meaningful, something where the responses are available to the public for meaningful discussion by this time of year, not after the school year starts. And if you're serious about wanting to fix that, I'd be happy to help. I'm intrigued by the idea of value-added scores, but when I can't get the formulas or any of the other basis for the calculations after 2.5 months of trying really hard, it's hard to have much confidence that there will be any productive outcome coming from anybody in this building. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Finney.
I'll make sure I'm not misquoted. I want to be certain that I don't believe that the accountability system is bad. Okay, I think the accountability system we have in place has led to some of the greatest gains in our state's history. Okay, so let's be clear about that. The question is, can it be improved? And I think we would do ourselves an injustice if we didn't consider potential ways to improve it.
Thank you, Mr. Romer. Tanya Nyman. Thank you. Leslie DeFlay.
As I've said before, it's definitely not DeFlay. It's Irish, not French, no matter how much you in South
So
Louisiana
sorry.
try to make it so. First of all, I'm glad to hear that the accountability system needs improving. I agree totally. I believe that it only it shows you where you have rates of poverty if you look at this system as it is. In regards to how to make sure school boards don't want to game the system, might I suggest that so that they don't act just in fear of the RSD taking over their schools, might I suggest that when the RSD does take over a school, it not only takes the school building, it takes all of the cost associated with that building, and it takes all of its legacy costs with it also, instead of leaving those costs with the school district, who has that in addition now has to take over keep those costs. They're keeping the students too, because those students, as in Baton Rouge, are choosing to stay with their original school district. As an example, take Prescott Middle, which it now is down to 200 students. They were sent over to Estruma High, and the Prescott Middle building was left vacant, and people tried to get it back to the school system to ease overcrowding, but the reaction was just to put students there back to the empty building. Secondly, we could also avoid I think this situation also leads to more movements for breakaway school districts, which are an added drain on the school systems. And if you are against one, you should be against I think breakaway school districts are also gaming the system.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, it bothers me that you're considering this as a result of Senator White's attempted breakaway as it was considered by the legislature this past session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sean Fleming. I suppose, I don't know.
Can he plug in the computer or no?
No.
Sean, we'll just review.
I'm being told no.
I'll just improve it on these for you. Thank you for taking me at this late hour. I will make my comments brief. I'm Sean Fleming. I'm with the Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council. I've presented to this board a number of times and in a lot of frustration at a lot of the efforts at ensuring kids with disabilities are included in all schools. So I'm very pleased that y'all are taking this consideration, looking at the accountability structure. I do think it's, as some other people have pointed out, looking at what East Baton Rouge specifically is doing to it, it's not surprising. The rules of the game have been laid out for a long time. It may be the accountability structure itself, or it may be how that accountability structure is used. But I'll share with you the information I have related to the effects of poverty and disability on school performance scores. What you have in front of you is a graph. The first two are scatter plots of every school in the state that basically show an inverse relationship between both poverty and school performance scores. And the bottom one shows an inverse relationship between the disability level of the school and school performance scores. If you look at the colored graphs on this side, what you will note, and I found it interesting that conversations before this referred to successful schools, decisions about giving schools 10-year charters because they were making the grade. And so this conversation is extremely relevant, related to everything y'all are looking at.
in my opinion. Because when I look at the A schools, they tend to have 40% of their students on free and reduced lunch and about 6% of their student body with disabilities. Now, this is a very gross measure because it doesn't give you the entire socioeconomic status of those students, nor does it give you the severity of disability. I can tell you I've looked at every school's statistics over the years, and I know that those A schools do not serve the proportionate number of students with significant disabilities. So it is even more telling the load, if you will, of responsibility in terms of meeting those students' needs that they do not share with the other schools. As you go up the scale, you notice that your F schools have almost 95 to 100% of their student body on free and reduced lunch, and about 12%, which is the state average of students with disabilities. D schools are not much less, they're just a little bit less impoverished. The slide below that actually breaks up those schools by grade. The A's are broken up by low, high, and medium A schools, and similarly for the B, C, and D schools, and you can see the progression is very, very clear. As the schools graded to an F, it increasingly gets more impoverished and has higher disability loads. On the back is a scatter plot of each one of the, so each dot represents a school. And you have all of the A schools on a plot of disability on your right and poverty on the bottom. And what you see is them marching to the right. And unfortunately, Ms. Kira Jones, you asked me a question that was, when I shared basically the simple version of this, if you will, last time, you asked the right question, I think. What do we do with this? And so what I did was I said, well, I want to look for a school that is succeeding, that has high poverty and high disability. Yes, ma'am. They are few and far between, unfortunately. So it really screams on two things. One is, from an advocate of someone wanting kids with disabilities to be included, it's very clear to me that the message is schools that succeed don't serve kids with disabilities. And that is a very, very scary message. And that's in every parish, in every district. I don't know why they don't have different levels. I can show you graphs of different school systems. The same school system has the same patterns that you see here.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming.
I really appreciate y'all really looking at the entire accountability structure and gauging schools on their teaching every kid and what that kid needs. I might just add as a final thing, standardized tests do not measure everything kids need or what schools are doing for all kids. And for a lot of kids, it is actually doing them a disservice in terms of trying to standardize what progress they've made. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Wayne Free.
Wayne Free, LAE. As a high school math teacher, I had a businessman one day motion me over. He said, I had a young man come into my clothing store the other day. Looked around for a little while, picked out a leather jacket, laid it on the counter, and looked at me and said, I'll give you $50. He said, I looked at the jacket, it was priced for $64. I said, what makes you think you can do that? He said, I'm in Mr. Free's math class. He's taught us about markup. How do you figure the cost of operating a store and the people who work there? And he said, our job is to figure out what it is we're willing to pay for something and make that offer. And he tells us if you're going to make money at that amount, you'll sell it to us. I said, and? He said, I was making money. I sold it to him. He said, I got to tell you, Wayne, I wish more educators understood that our job is not to teach a test. It is to teach the kids the things they need to know in life, and at a much broader level than what we're doing now. I have worked through, in the last 40 years, so many education reform issues that failed because they never thought about how do you truly evaluate children. I worked in Kentucky when we did Kentucky Education Reform Act. I served on the committees to develop the CURIS assessment. I was there when we found the company making it was incompetent, and we fired them. They changed their name and started doing LEAP here in Louisiana the next year. Every exam I ever gave a kid was important. But to rate it at 51% for any purpose is a level of incompetence that most people know better. I'm speaking in favor of looking at the evaluation processes and changing them. And changing them in ways that make sure that we don't manipulate, either by moving people around or pushing kids out before they take the test, or teaching the test and narrowing the curriculum to do that. The process that we've adopted in this state is a failure just as much as what happened in many states. And when I came in, we were grouping kids by ability level, and we were trained that you shouldn't do that, and we're doing it again. You should read Gerald Bracey's final exam sometime if you get a chance. It's one of the most effective to look at this process. And the one thing he finds is true everywhere, that we have the best schools in this country and the worst schools in this country, and many of them are within the same state and within sight of each other. And it has to do with poverty rather than instructional practice. The one thing you need to understand is that the growth in this state over the last 8 years occurred mostly before the last 3 years, and it's because that's when we were learning to teach the test. When we go to the Common Core assessment, it will drop significantly, and over the next 6 or 7 years, it will grow as we narrow the test, and our kids still won't be able to go buy the jacket they need.
Thank you, Mr. Frey. Ms. Beebe, I think I interrupted you, and I said I would come back to you. Do you have a comment? No. Okay. Anyone else have a comment?
Yeah, I'd like to amend the motion in addition to receiving it, and we would direct the department to study the advantages and disadvantages of representing individual student progress in the letter grade annually awarded to districts and schools, and report the results back to the academic goals and instructional improvement.
I second that. We have a motion and a second. Ms. Bronstein. Do we have any discussion?
I'd like for you to restate the motion.
Can you read the motion again?
Yes, ma'am. Recommends that the board receive the presentation regarding student location and accountability, and direct the department to study the advantages and disadvantages of representing individual student progress using state assessment results in the letter grade annually awarded to districts and schools, and report the results to the Academic Goals and Instructional Improvement Committee.
Any other questions? Any opposition to the motion? The motion carries. Next item.
Next item is on page 29. Consideration of a report on the Student Scholarship for Educational Excellence Program. The department recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion? Motion. Jones, seconded by Mr. Gio. Any comments or questions before the presentation begins? All right, who's doing the presentation?
Ms. Bradford, what's your, since I was the one that initiated the item, but I'll just go ahead and let the department give their presentation first.
Good.
And then I'll make my comments and next question.
I'm happy to make the presentation. As you know, members, over the course of the last year, we have conducted the first Student Scholarship for Excellence program. In that program, roughly 4,600 students were enrolled. Subsequently, the program, as required by law, took applications from across the state. We have admitted roughly 8,000 students, and we're continuing to admit applications on a rolling basis for this upcoming year. Funding for the program will be available through a line in House Bill 1 that includes other programs that are no longer in the MFP because of the court ruling that negates last year's MFP formula. And this will be funded exclusively through state dollars out of House Bill 1. But it's important to note that these kids are no longer in the MFP count. So the state is not spending any more or any less money than it would if they were in public schools. In terms of schools themselves, we do have additional schools in the program for this year, but we really saw our growth primarily through schools taking additional kids. It's also fair to say that not every school was allowed to take additional kids or was allowed to take all of the students that they requested to take. As you know, there is this board has put into place regulations that limit the number of students that a school is able to take to 50 or 20% of their current enrollment, whichever is larger. And if they are to get above that, then they have to have a waiver that is granted based on academic excellence. Not every school was given a waiver to be able to do that. I should finally say that we're concluding not just the test results from this year, but also the financial audits from the schools, and we will have updated information on the finances of schools later in the summer. We'll be producing what are called scholarship cohort indexes, which is really the same as a school performance score for those students in the fall, alongside when we do for every public school, and appreciate the opportunity to share an update on it today. In terms of the most concrete piece of information we have at this point, it's fair to say that 94% of parents this year on the annual survey approved of their school's performance and are looking forward to re-enrolling their students. So thank you so much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Questions?
Do we have any public comment?
Yes.
Oh, you can go ahead. I'm going to wait.
The first speaker is Tony Lynn Tyson.
My name's Tony Lynn Tyson. I'm the principal at Bishop McManus Academy, and I appreciate your patience in hearing what we have to say today. Bishop McManus Academy has been serving the New Orleans community, New Orleans East specifically, for 38 years, and we've been known for quality standards of educational excellence. When I received the phone call on May 2nd from Ms. Marion Shetty, Mr. Adam Hoff, and Mr. Dan Fuchs, I was very concerned to hear that the new scholarship students that had been awarded seats to our school were now being denied the privilege because of our recent LEAP scores. So they gave them the seats and then said, no, you can't have them. We have 104 scholarship students in grades kindergarten through 7 at Bishop McManus Academy, but only 44 of those students are in grades 3 through 7. So only 44 were tested with the LEAP. Based on that 44 out of 104 students, this decision was made. Out of those 44 students, 15 of them were in their first year at BMA. I was told that the decision that was made was based on Bulletin 133, and after I read completely through that bulletin, I couldn't find any policy that we had violated. Given the fact that less than half of the scholarship students at BMA were used to make this decision, it's kind of erroneous that Bishop McManus Academy was publicized as an academically poorly performing school, which is what our parents were told when the scholarship department called them. BMA is not an academically poorly performing school, nor is it a failing school. We've agreed to accept academically poorly performing students from schools where they were failing because BESE gave parents the right to choose a better education for their children. Now parents have been denied that right to choose, and we've been declared as an unfit academic institution by individuals who are unfamiliar with our school based solely on one set of LEAP test scores. As an educational institution that has endured the test of time, we have no problem meeting standards or setting goals. Our board has been doing that for us since 1975. We do, however, have a problem with standards that are uncleared and or not applied applied unfairly. Bulletin 133 states that school data will be considered beginning with the 2012-13 school year. That policy appears to have been violated in our instance. Lastly, Schools other than non-public schools are allowed to remediate students falling short on the LEAP test and to retest in the summer. Non-publics are not allowed to retest. It seems that as non-public schools who truly do desire to help families and young people, policies are not being applied equitably and fairly. Thank you.
Ms. Tyson.
Let me just respond to that just briefly. There is a policy that's in the bulletin that says that the number of students that a school may admit annually is 50 or 20% of their current enrollment, whichever is larger, and that any number above that requires an exception. So that exception can be based on overwhelming parent demand for the school or a demonstrated evidence of the school's ability to serve those kids academically well. And in this case, your school has participated in the program for multiple years, and this year the proficiency rate among the students taking the test was below 25%. We didn't cast a definitive judgment on whether or not your school is a good school or a bad school, but really the burden of proof has to be that, yes, to get an exception to a rule, because the rule is about 50, we would have to have seen evidence of growth. Now, you're right. We've never, this is the first year of those rules. And as a result, you're right, we had to apply them retroactively after having already assigned students. But that is the policy, and granting an exception to a school with below 25% test takers proficient seemed not in compliance with the rules.
May I respond? In no way did Ms. Shetty, Mr. Hoff, or Mr. Fuchs give that information out, and I beg to differ with you because I have parents on staff who were called, and they were told that we were not getting students because our school was declared an academically poorly performing school. That's their words, not mine.
Well, you can call it what you want to call it, but I'm suggesting the policy is just that if you are to take more than 50 students in a given year, you have to have demonstrated evidence because you're getting an exception to a rule. An exception has to be demonstrated academic excellence. And with respect, and I don't say this to be insulting, but below 25% proficiency, we just could not accept
below
this year.
25% of 44 students out of a 205 school population.
Again, it's the best, yes.
Our premise is where is the fairness in making that decision on 44 out? That's less than half.
I'm not going to get into a protracted argument about it, but 25% among any students is very, very low. Too much for us to grant an exception to a rule. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Various.
Lee Varios, St. Tammany teacher. To the previous speaker from McManus, all I can say is welcome to the party. If you want to be on the same fairness level as public schools, though, offer up all of your students and your school to the same regulations and unfair accountability standards that we have, and then we'll see how it works out. That's just the way it goes. Thank you.
Thank you. James Finney.
Aside from the fact that it's a really bad idea to fund private schools with public education money, it would be nice if this department were capable of doing that in a competent manner. I was looking at the third quarter data in terms of where the student's school of origin was for which East Baton Rouge Parish is being charged. Don't worry, it was redacted, so I don't have the student's addresses, just their previous school of record. One of those was Lanier Elementary using the East Baton Rouge Parish Code, so apparently that kid was homeschooled or dropped off the planet for 3 years and then poof, used the fact that that was a failing school 3 years ago to come back and get a scholarship. But I could put up with one person that fell through the cracks. But then I got further in the report and saw that East Baton Rouge Parish taxpayers are being charged for a kid that went to Dorsey Elementary School and then moved to East Baton Rouge and got to go to private school, not his appropriate public school. one that went to Iberville Elementary, a couple that went to East Iberville Elementary or High School, one that went to Millerwall Elementary School, I don't even know what parish that's in, one from Geraldine Boudreau, one from East Thibodaux Middle School. But at least in those cases, the school of origin was specified. And then I got to the back page of that report, where there were another several dozen where the state apparently has no clue where these students had been before, but they applied for vouchers and they got them. There's plenty of choice among legitimate public schools in East Baton Rouge Parish. If you need a voucher program in Orleans, which I doubt, I'm not qualified to say that, but I know I don't want my public money that should support the East Baton Rouge school district's public schools supporting Hosanna or any of the other private schools any worse than I wanted supporting the disaster of the RSD. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just for the board's clarity, thank you, Dr. Finney, excuse me. We have verified with every district that the student that was counted in terms of their state funds being counted toward the program were in the district of registry at the given, or residence at that given date and time. Now, they may have moved, I certainly understand that, over the course of the year, but we verified with every district this was the case. This was an issue taken care of in October. Secondly, let me also say that going forward, there will be no such issue because the funding will not be, there will be no discounting of a local entity, so it doesn't really much matter anymore because it is purely a state fund direct to the school as to the residence of the student. But I thank you, Dr. Finney, for raising the concerns.
And our last speaker is Steve Monahan.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford, members of the committee, and the day's been long, so I'll talk fast. This isn't the venue for a debate over the philosophies behind whether or not vouchers should be or shouldn't be. That's decided on the other side of the street. I think it is appropriate, though, to have a discussion that this is the body responsible for rules. And I just want to make a couple of very brief points and keep it tight and factual. This program was launched not for the first time last year. It was launched in 2008. It was launched as a pilot. I am learning new things every day, and one of the things I learned about words is pilot doesn't mean what I once believed it meant in education, which meant you would get a base of information. You'd make comparisons in regard to the success or failure. You cut the cards, and you show them to the folks, and you make your decisions based upon data. We expanded in 2012, in the very controversial session of 2012. It was a dataless session. We didn't expand based upon data. We expanded based upon philosophy. We expanded based upon a belief system. And everyone's entitled to that belief system. I embrace your right to believe, and you could subscribe to Milton Friedman's church and his faith and his system, but that's not what you're supposed to do as decision makers. So I think that's the first correction. I think the second correction is I don't like warm and fuzzies any more than you all do. And if we're going to use warm and fuzzies, and 94% of the parents are happy with their voucher schools, then we should use such comparisons in public schools, and we should use the happiness quotient. It's a real good place to go. And before you had data, everyone loved their public schools until the data was propagated, and then we had to debate whether it was manufactured. So all I would hope as we move forward, you would deal as a body with this. There's been a whopping 30-point difference between voucher schools and performance on your own test opposed to the state average. We went from 25 million to 44 million in the last session, and I sat through the debates like many of you all did in the Senate, and the excuse given for expansion wasn't data-based. There was an argument made that at least we know children will come home alive tonight. Well, if we have that kind of a problem in our public schools, call out the National Guard. Because it shouldn't be a safety issue or fear for life and limb in any school, private, parochial, public. My final comment is this. There was an excellent article written just recently, a couple of days ago. It was published, Louisiana School Vouchers, Private Schools Get an F by the Program's Own Standard. And there was a petition for more time. You could pull it off the line. And not because it agreed with me. It simply compared. It compared the results. So let's compare the results. Apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and hopefully as we go on, you'll expand this with legitimacy, or you'll reel it in, because it'll be the experiment that didn't produce the results you were looking for. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you, and thank you for sitting here for so long.
Thank you, Smiley. We have a motion.
No, while I was waiting, I wanted to let everyone.
Thank you, I'm sorry, yes.
Since I was the original member to request this, and the reason why I request this information, I've had the opportunity to visit several of the schools that were listed in the newspaper, because I'm one, I have to go see for myself, not just go by what the media says. And I had the opportunity to visit these schools, and I'm not going to call the schools' names out that I went to visit, but I wasn't truly impressed with what they were doing. But the reason why I decided to put this information in our packet today is because of principle. Not because of philosophy or theory, it's because of principle. And when I visit these schools and listen to the providers, and when I went into these schools and I met with some of the students and interacted and observed and engaged, a lot of them said that no one from the department has come to visit their school to even see what they are doing. I was the first. Secondly, when they expressed to me their concerns wasn't really truly to have an increase of enrollment. Their concern was that the department put a label out there in the media saying that they were deemed unacceptable and put a stigma to their schools, which was not accurate information. And for these schools, it wasn't about we need more students or we want more students. It was about the principle of putting a negative stigma to their school that they have built for many years. And when you talk about policy, Superintendent White, and you say, well, we're looking at the test scores, in New Orleans, this was a pilot program. You did not mention that these schools that was in the pilot program, it was an option for them to take the LEAP or the iLEAP test. It wasn't mandatory. It was an option. And then you're going to take those same scores and use it against them because it was an option for them to use to have these kids tested. It wasn't mandatory.
Yes,
wait,
it was.
Wait, let me finish. No, it was not. Let me finish, because I have the policy. Secondly, when the board decided to take upon this accountability for the scholarship program, I'll never forget, Mr. Roma called, and he said we need accountability for the scholarship program, and I agreed. We did. The policy didn't go into effect until August 1st, 2012. The scores came out May or June 2012. The same scores that you're using against these schools to say that they're unacceptable, Superintendent White. How can you do that? The policy didn't go into effect until August 1st. That was the purpose of us having the meeting in July, is because we had to meet that August 1st deadline that was required by the legislators for us to put accountability into process. These scores that you've been dealing out to the community and to the media are scores from 2012, 2013. When I called the department and asked them, give me the scores for 2013, 2014 school year. You know what they told me? They didn't have the scores. So I said, you don't have the scores? I said, okay, what formula was used to say that these are the scores for these particular schools? You know what they told me? They couldn't give me the formula. They couldn't tell me how they were able to get the outcome of the percentage of the test scores. Then secondly, we talk about FERPA. And I'm not going to even mention the school. Within them 7 schools you mentioned, only 1 student took the LEAP test. 1. And you deemed that school unacceptable. 1 student. And you say that that school did not meet the mark or the standards. But when you look at Living Word, New Living Word in Monroe, and it's quoted in the newspaper from you, Superintendent White, that school, 85% of the scholarship students are below grade level in math. 69% of the scholarship students are below in English. And this school received 117 students. That is unacceptable. But you increase their student enrollment this year but decrease those other 7 schools that had less than amount of students in this particular school. So if you want to talk about what's right and what's wrong, and I'm just looking at your policy, and the policy states, if the school receives a scholarship cohort index below 50 in the second year of participating or in any year thereof, the school would not be eligible for enrollment. This is the policy that BESE approved, Bulletin 133. So I'm standing on principle, and I'm standing on law, and I'm standing on policy. And the policy did not go in effect to 2012, August 1st of 2012, and you're using those old scores to use against those schools. And I think that is unacceptable. And we talk about accountability, there's no accountability.
Madam Chairman?
May I just clarify some facts?
Yes.
Couple thoughts. So first, we did use this year's test scores, 2012-13. Now, we don't have 2013-14 tests yet, to your point.
Up, but you know what I was trying to say.
On occasion. So 2012 to 2013, April of 2013, we used those scores. The regulations that were passed last summer say that if there's evidence of academic incompetence, then the school may not participate for this year, and that is the department's ability to determine that. Now, I would say to you, and you and I may disagree about this, multiple years of participating in the program with more than 10 kids taking the test, where fewer than 25% of the kids are at basic or above, is academic incompetence. Secondly, a new living word, as was indicated in the media story from which you read, there is an enrollment rule saying that you may not take more than 50 kids or 20% of your enrollment if you have not proven you could serve those kids academically well. As we said in the media, then we are making that consideration as we speak, determining what the effects of reducing their enrollment would be, and we're going to come back to the public in that school with that decision. But we used this year's tests. We applied a very legitimate definition of academic incompetence, which I would say, frankly, is very generous at 25% proficiency after many years of participating in the program. And at New Living Word, we're applying this year's test scores after 1 year of participating in the program to their enrollment as well. So I think we're within the bounds of what was passed by the board. We're using this year's test, not last year's test.
But Superintendent White, you also stated in the paper, majority of those schools that were listed, in each grade level, they had less than 10 students that was tested, okay? In order to have a subgroup and not violate FERPA, you had to have more than 10 students in a subgroup.
FERPA is a law about how you represent information,
and make sure
is
that
about
the
how you
students are not able to be
represent it
identified
publicly, correct. That's a different thing from being able to say that whether a school is academically competent or not. For example, if you have 9 grades and 9 students in each grade, you don't have a FERPA cohort in any grade, but you still have 81 kids. And I would suggest that based on the size that we said, which is a minimum of 10 kids, at a proficiency of under 25%, multiple years being in the program, at a certain point you have to draw the line. We have to have standards. Whether it's a public school, whether it's a private school, you have to have standards. And by the way, I would suggest that for all the talking about accountability, that you should stand behind a state that is willing to say the taxpayer should receive accountability on his or her dollar, the parent should receive accountability on his or her dollar, and that we should never direct a child. We should always make available options, but we should never direct a child toward a school that we know last year proved itself not to be academically competent. And if the school proves itself again to be competent, then we pick back up and we take new kids.
Okay, well, my final statement will be, you stated, John White, you stated in the newspaper that you would not state the scores because there were less than 10 in each test grade. You stated that in the newspaper. Not only that, you also stated it should also be stated by Mr. White that scores in other grades were not included in New Living Word because the small number of students that were enrolled, for example, in their 4th grade. And when you want to talk about accountability, and you want to talk about let's stand behind accountability and not sending students to fail in school, tell me what the RSD is doing. They're redirecting those kids in New Orleans from those scholarship schools to those charter schools like KIPP, for example, and some other schools in New Orleans that are deemed failing which I have parents that call me. I have seen the letters myself. Not only that, I have an email from your department stating that these kids that are in the scholarship program, no, do not retest if they fail the LEAP or the iLEAP test. You are not eligible to provide remediation for these kids. So meaning that if the child is in the scholarship program and failed the test and decide to go back to a traditional public school, guess what? They will be in the same grade. However, with the scholarship program, they're socially promoting those kids. And they're not even giving the same opportunity. These are the same kids, but not getting the same opportunity to be able to retest if they fail the LEAP and ITT. And you want to talk about accountability?
Well, I think
There's no accountability there, Mr. White. Now, you're going to get me to another level, because there's no accountability, and you're putting our kids at stake, and you're not doing what's right, and you always want to sit behind accountability and say what we are doing as a whole of RSD, and we're not doing anything for our kids. We are using them, we're recycling them, and we're using them for money, and that's the bottom line.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Ms. Buffy?
I can't believe we're having this conversation. I want to
believe
thank
it.
the superintendent for thinking about the students who are in schools with such poor performance and making sure that this is not continued. And I do not see how you can compare a school district where you have students who have struggled historically, who have increased, percentage points increased more than the percent of kids that are in these schools that you're talking about. We're talking about 34% increase. I just can't believe we're having this conversation. Why would you want to leave a kid in a school with such poor performance?
Well, Ms. Buffy, you was a teacher, and I'm disappointed in you and a lot of decisions that you make as a board member. But that's no here or there.
Let's not try to get
However,
personal.
just to respond to her comment, is that you're correct. But when we're redirecting those kids into other failing schools, that they're coming from a failing school and redirecting them to other failing schools, you tell me where the accountability and you tell me where the fairness is, Ms. Buffy. Tell me that. And it's unacceptable.
I would love to give all of our kids better choices. I would love for all of our kids to have the opportunity to go to A schools. The fact of the matter is that there is a difference. There is a difference. You are comparing two systems that do not match up.
Thank you, Ms. Buffy. Any other comments or questions? If not, we have a motion. Could we please read the motion?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Recommends that the board receive the report on the Student Scholarship for Educational Excellence Program. Ms. Orange Jones and Mr. Gio.
Thank you. Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, we receive the report. Next item.
Next item is on page 30, item 5.1, consideration of a status report on the Special Education Advisory Panel. The department recommendation is to receive the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Gio. Thank you, Dr. Beebe. Any questions or comments from board members? Hearing none, we'll go to the public comments. John Peruka.
My prepared statement was good afternoon, but I guess it's good evening now. Okay, my name's John Peruka, and my wife Nancy and I live in Mandeville, Louisiana. We have 2 children in the St. Tammany Parish Public Schools. We are strong supporters of good public education, not only in St. Tammany, but every place. I can't say more about the teachers, support staff, administrators, and central office staff in St. Tammany Parish Public Schools. In my opinion, they aren't the best schools in the state. They are the best schools in this country. I come to you today because I'm very confused. I want to talk about LA2 diplomas. My wife and I made a choice, and I'm going to use the word choice throughout my presentation. when each of our children are about in third grade, to have our children pursue an alternative LA2 diploma. They both received special education services. It was not an easy choice. We consulted many experts, but it was the right choice for our children. We want our children to get a diploma, not a certificate. LA2 is the only path to receiving a diploma that fits our children's abilities. It was not easy 7 years ago to accept that our son, for example, could never go to LSU or Southeastern. As a parent, we had to make that choice. That choice is a reality for our daughter also. Fast forward to today, the beginning of the school year. My wife and I went to open houses for our children and parent meetings, and we began to hear LA2 was being gotten rid of. I didn't believe it, but like most people, my wife and I both work and take care of our children. I didn't do anything until I started to hear about the EOC test. My son Johnny would have to take an Algebra 1. I thought that it would be modified since his IEP has a box that we've, for 7 years, put a check in, and it says alternative assessment. I went to the Department of Education website. I began to look at things. Made a copy of the LA2 Parents Guide, which I have a copy here. It states, under the question, how does LA2 differ in the standardized tests? The standardized tests will have fewer questions, less reading, less writing, a modified format to include fewer questions per page, and a larger print size.
Mr. Paruk, I have to ask you to please wrap it up as you can.
Okay, I waited all day.
I understand.
Okay. I was told that all students had to take the regular EOC in all EOC subjects. When I looked into it, I found no LA2 or modified EOC had been developed. My wife and I began to prepare our son, along with his teachers, for the Algebra EOC, since there seemed no alternative. I stayed up at least 4 nights a week with my son, working on problems until about midnight. For months, we hired a tutor and emailed his teachers daily. They were awesome. We talked to St. Tammany Parish personnel on a regular basis. The emotional toil it took on my son was enormous. He cried on many occasions and told us he was stupid. It would never be able to have a real life. My wife and I, of course, assured Johnny how great an individual he is, and that we would make sure his life was fulfilling. At that point, I began to do even more research about LA2. I contacted the Department of Education in the past 3 months and started asking questions about LA2. And I went to the Department of Education website. I downloaded documents. I became confused. The LA2 Parent Guide talks about LA2 being a diploma, but the LA2 Assessment Guide on page III under Exit Documents says, correct policy states that a student participating in LA2 is progressing toward a certificate of achievement rather than a state high school diploma. I was shocked and confused. I went to the DOE high school diploma chart and realized there was Louisiana Core, Basic Core, and Career Diplomas. No LA2. For 7 years, my wife and I thought our children were in diploma programs. The information on DOE seems confusing, and I started to call and email the DOE. The first response I got was, Mr. Peralta, it is only a rumor that LA2 is being phased out. That was verbally stated to me over the phone by DOE personnel. When I got in touch with Mr. Garvey, and he referred to me to DOE people. Those spokespeople said LeTou was being phased out after 2014-15. I was told the federal government saw the LeTou diploma and said we could not offer it. I also read an article by Superintendent White in this past weekend in the Times-Picayune.
Mr. Parikh, I hate to interrupt you, but you're please kind of try to wrap it up.
I only have a page left.
I appreciate that, but you've had double the time.
This states Louisiana is revamping its diploma system, and Mr. White is touring the state to get input. Well, my input, Mr. White, is not to get rid of the LeTou diploma. Education is a state function. Thousands of people came forward. I don't see many of the faces of the people who are on the board. Thousands of people in the state with special education children came forward years ago to get LeTou instituted. We tend to be proactive people, special education parents. I did ask if any of the board members have, and I've been told a few of you do. It hits you in kindergarten. You're given a booklet, your rights and responsibilities. I'm my child's advocate, and every special education parent is. I will not give up, and we will not give up on this responsibility. My child's IEP says alternative assessments. How can the state just say we never developed them and force LeTou diploma students to take unmodified tests? Is that legal? More importantly, does that take into account the emotional stress this puts a child through? My son will have 5 standardized tests next year as a sophomore. English 2, EOC, biology, EOC, the math, EOC, and 2 LeTou assessments, 1 in math and 1 in English. A special ed child, 5 assessments. If you don't pass the EOC, you still have to go to remediation. You don't pass it again, you still have to go to remediation again for any kind of waiver. That's not fair. That's penalizing a child for choosing a alternative diploma.
Mr. Parikh, if you would please make your final comments, I'd appreciate
Adopt
it.
LeTou as a diploma and put its requirements on the state chart under the new diploma program. Get all the information on the DOE website concerning LeTou to be clear and not contradictory. I even have a document from 2011 from a presentation by DOE. It says, good news, students taking LeTou are eligible to receive a high school diploma, complies with federal guidelines. When did that change? Finally, I'm going to say that the presentation, that this PowerPoint, I was sent it, and I'm confused about the task force PowerPoint, because it says in that presentation, and I quote, for 2014-15 and future years, LeTou designation will remain for promotion and graduation purposes only. In this presentation before the board, doesn't that mean then my child can get a LeTou diploma after 2014-15? If it doesn't mean that, and it's true that it's being gone away, you need to inform people. I don't want to sign this next year without being told LeTou is going away. You need to inform special education. And Mr. White, if you're going around the state, because I looked at where you're going, I only see Monroe, I'd be glad to go to any of the presidents. I hope you're coming to St. Tammany Parish, because my wife and I have talked to a lot of parents. And there are a lot of parents in the state that will come forward and would be glad to work with you concerning an alternative diploma.
Thank you, Mr. Parikh.
And much as I hate to let Ms. Barrios in on a secret, I will be in Covington next Monday.
Our next speaker is Lee Barrios. Allison LeBlanc.
I think she left.
She's taking her place.
I'm Sean Fleming with Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council. Allison LeBron to leave. She actually had 3 points to say related to the recommendations on the Special Education Advisory Panel. The first is related to funding for assistive technology. She basically recommends more funding for it. She actually was headed to Ruston to go to a training on assistive technologies was the reason she had to leave here. She sat here all day, and you may have seen her in here. The second one, and I just won't reiterate all the points, but regarding Law 2 that the gentleman before me just shared, but Ms. LeBlanc referred to it as by having her child sit through summer class just to promote him is like breaking their spirit. By having him determined eligible for Law 2 and then not giving it a test that meets his needs does not seem, in her words, and the gentleman before me, aligned with federal requirements. If we're going to determine someone's eligible for something, why aren't we giving it to them? I've looked at the budget for the state level funding, and there is an increase in funding for alternate assessments, and I personally am curious to what it's being used for, or what advocates have continually asked BESE and the department to look at grade level assessment, grade level accommodated standard assessments for alternate assessments, and those are allowable on with any waiver at any level, and why we aren't continuing to pursue that. I think that would resolve a lot of the issues that are going on. She also had similar issues related to diploma options. She felt like the Pandora's box was being opened with some of the options being, I couldn't really capture exactly all the things. She thought one diploma was a better option than having a multitude of diplomas, but I've also heard other people say the opposite, so thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Hill. Jennifer Hill. Bambi Polizotto. Polizola. That is our last card. The motion on the floor is to receive the report. Any opposition to this motion? Hearing none, the motion carries. Next item.
Next item is on page 33, 5.2, consideration of the membership of the Accountability Commission. The department recommendation is to approve.
Madam Chair, if I may,
I need a motion.
well, I need to, if I may, first give some clarity, and then, well, I think a motion will be in order, because I'm to present a slate of candidates. So, I'll remind members quickly that we determined at the last meeting to reconstitute the Accountability Commission membership. It would include a combination of appointees by the superintendent. It would include a combination of recommendations made by the superintendent but approved by our board, and then it would also include members as nominated by BESE members and presented to you for your approval. So that is what we're doing, and if you will turn to page 34, I can quickly walk you through the membership that I propose in concert with the superintendent on his nominees. On page 34, you will see the 6 nominees that are the nominees of the superintendent at his discretion. It includes a variety of folks, and certainly I won't walk through them each individually. On page 35 are the considerations of the nominees that I looked at for proposal to this board for approval, and I will give you a little bit of background. First of all, to go to, I hate this theme has developed, but Ms. Berrios, I want you to understand that this committee will run as a public meeting, which is important to note, given that we've had a consistent theme there. I want to make that. But if you will go down the list, out of the nominees, I will list to you those that I propose sitting on the committee. I chose these for a variety of reasons. I wanted some that had a history of institutional knowledge with the Accountability Commission. I wanted some that were actual practitioners. I wanted some new faces, and I also wanted to try to geographically spread out the membership. So under educator at the top on page 35, I'm recommending Dr. Sandra McCullough. Under non-public school representative, I'm recommending John Bennett. Under parent, I'm recommending Brandy Thomas. Under school board member, I'm recommending Brent Duncan. And under the community representative, we named 2. I'm recommending Stephanie DeSalle and Bridget Nealon. The next three categories are categories where the superintendent was able to make the nominees from which I chose. LEA Administrator Lori Carrollton from Plaquemine Parish. On page 36, LEA Representative Kyle Faulting from Lincoln Parish Schools. And under Post-Secondary Education Representative, I'm recommending John Burns. I appreciate members who did forward nominations to me. I tried to spread it out geographically, and I tried to combine both new individuals along with some that had some institutional history of this board, and I appreciate your consideration for that slate. I would move for approval.
Second. Any discussion, Ms. Beebe?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Beebe?
You know, I think we're slow learners on this board because I didn't see anywhere where we have invited the members of the Teachers Association, Education Association, not teacher unions. And I mean, these are the people, and I'm not tied to any of them. But I've heard for a couple of years now how they should be invited to the table. They want to be a part of the discussion. And I mean, how will we ever establish trust and building relationships when we don't even invite these folks to the table? Shame on you. And you know what, Mr. Rama, don't send me an email asking me to nominate anyone, because it's obvious that you believe in controlling situations and boards and commissions.
Wasting my time. Any other comments or questions? Ms. Orange-Jones?
Just a point of clarification. Can you just remind the board what the purpose of the Accountability Commission will ultimately be? What their charge will be? What their work will be?
Well, as referenced here today, it's an ongoing commission to consider potential improvements and changes to our accountability system that we have in place, and modifications as appropriate. Generally, they're given guidance by BESE or the DOE as to items that we would like them to consider under those accountability questions that we have. I will say it is a public forum. Everyone will be invited to attend and invited to give comment. I regret that some apparently weren't satisfied with the selections. I probably shouldn't have set myself up to have to make the decision, but I wanted nominees to come from the entire board, but I didn't want us to have a board of 100 either. So I set myself up for defeat, but that's okay. I did ask members. Not every member made a nominee. I asked every member to do so. I asked for a deadline on membership. The deadline came and went. I asked again for a second opportunity for people to provide nominees. Some took me up on that. In addition, I've asked Dr. Beebe on several occasions to serve on committees, and I appreciate that she's done so. And I look forward to having an opportunity to do it again in the future. I've tried to be fair with these nominees and make them representative across the state and across a variety of skill sets. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lee?
Couple of questions or possible clarifications. On page 34, I'm under the impression that the principal representative has retired. I don't know if that makes any difference or not. I'm just making a comment.
I don't know that she's retired yet, but she is retiring. I said I'm not sure if she's officially retired yet, but she is retiring.
I thought she already had. I don't know.
Maybe she has, but I didn't get that from the last communication.
And then, this is a really minor question, but I'm assuming on page 35, the non-public school representative, John Bennett, is that our former cohort?
Yes, it is.
I thought he was in West Baton Rouge. Was
He lives in West Baton Rouge,
okay.
but he is a principal in East Baton Rouge.
Okay.
And I will say, I'm sorry.
Then I want to ask, I'm not trying to create a problem with this, but
sure you are. Go ahead, though.
Is it possible to add some additional people to the list? Let me tell you what I want to just, I do think the comment that was made by Dr. Beebe has some merit, and it looks to me like it would be good if the 3 teacher organizations had a representative. These people spend a lot of time and effort dealing with education. I know in years past they've been active members of committees. It just looks to me like it would be good to invite them to be able to participate.
I'll only comment to the extent that at the last meeting, we actually outlined the categories that would be considered for nomination, and we had that discussion and this board voted, so the nominations I chose from were the ones that we selected as a board.
I know, and
So-
I'm not faulting, I'm
Yeah,
not.
I understand.
I
I will say this as well, we do have a meeting coming up, which I think we would like to make sure this body is constituted and prepared for that meeting, so.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? We have several cards. Lee Barrios. Angela Aleph.
Angela Aleph with the People LLC. Mr. Romer, I wasn't aware until you just said so that you were the one who came up with the different nominees.
I didn't come up with the nominees myself. Board members came up with the nominees, and I was to select from the categories.
Okay.
We had a certain number in each category, so.
Okay.
We had more than one nominee in certain categories.
Well, then, my comments are for the whole board, then. As a citizen and as a member of the People LLC, we just really have concerns. It really seems evident that the business lobby has a very strong presence and representation on this board already. And to have Cable and lobby as the community representatives is very disturbing. One example of why this is disturbing, especially to us at this time, is a reform agenda bill that was in session in the House. We were speaking with the lobbyist who informed us that lobby was not going to call that bill up because they didn't need to, because they were going to have BESE do it for them anyway when the bill was evidently going to die. So it's very concerning that a bill that the people didn't want, which is why it didn't pass, a citizen who went on their own dime to the Capitol to talk to their legislators gets talked to by lobby's lobbyist and told that it's their bill and they're going to have you guys do it anyway, no matter what the people wanted. And as far as the Council for Better Louisiana, it's just another business lobby. I think it's time that the BESE board start to reverse this trend to whatever degree you're capable of doing that, and make this board responsible to the people, and truly responsible to the community if you're going to talk about community representatives, and not to the lobbyists who have a stranglehold on the fourth floor in the Capitol, the legislature, and this BESE board. So that's my request. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next person is Steve Monahan.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford, and thank you, members of the committee, and thank you, Ms. Beebe and Superintendent Lee. I appreciate the insertion of what I think should be the obvious, and I think it's also for me to, because I feel like I should speak as frankly and honestly as you all do to the audience, I'm going to speak frankly and honestly to you. I had no grand expectations to be returned back to the commission In fact, if I were a betting person, I would have put good hard currency on the fact that I would not be invited back to the commission. And I'm an adult, and I accept that, and that is a product of politics, and it's a product of elections, and that I can live with. What I think, and I understand, and I do appreciate the honesty of your board president when he speaks of the selection process and the categories that have been determined to fit the needs of the commission. But I do have to state for the record that I never served on the commission because I felt a particular joy that came with the meetings, or that I controlled the commission, or my opinion was particularly held in high regard. I felt the reason I sat on that commission was because there were 21,000 plus teachers and school employees that were members of my organization, and sometimes the voice that I had to, or the opinion I had to convey, might not be my personal, it never really was, I may agree, but it was the opinion of the conversations we had with teachers, and teachers communicating to us what their positions were. So it was the opportunity to be, and I was honored by the opportunity to be a messenger. Now, what I see has happened here, it's as arbitrary and capricious as all decisions ultimately are. There's categories that have been fit with people. They're not geographically based. There's fresh faces and along with stale ones like my own. Some of those faces on there have been there as long as I have, and I've served since 2003. And before me, there was organizational presence. But it did give us an opportunity for all of us, no matter how fervently we might disagree, to be at the table, to have an opportunity to state the various messages and ideas that we carry. I think this is a shame. I really think it is a giant step back, and I felt it the last session, the session before. I mean, no personal offense in what I'm saying. I think it is a very politicized environment we're in. We have delivered messages that really some do not appreciate. Last session, there was an attempt to basically extinguish us permanently. And I get all of that. I understand it. But no, you know what they say, President Romer? And I think it's the truth. When there's no justice, there's no peace. And we're not going to ever have a meeting of the minds if we can't sit at the table and at least pretend for the brief time we sit on the commission that we respect each other's opinion and we value it as partners in process, not sitting around the room as the lawn furniture, but sitting at the table in the conversation. I would hope that someone would be bold enough to at least have a straight-up vote down or up. And do you want the organizations, and I'm not speaking of the LFT, I'm speaking of APEL, and I'm wrapping it up, and I'm speaking of LAE, and I can't speak for them, but I think there should be a flat-out motion made to add 3 individuals, because God knows there's enough chairs to slide up to the table, to this commission, for an opportunity to participate in the process as we have since this commission was in inception. And if Lobby will be there, I'll be darned if I'm not going to be there sitting somewhere next to Ms. Nealon or Cable or the rest. So thank you very much for your tolerance. I got a little passion in my soul left too, President Romer.
Let me, for the sake of board members, I appreciate the comments, Steve. And despite our disagreements on issues, we've generally had good discussions, and I appreciate your comments. This is our body's committee, and I nominated people based on the categories that were approved by this board. There is nothing that is purely at this point a recommendation to you for membership based on those categories. So again, that is the nominations that I make. Others may suggest modification.
Madam Chair.
I offer a
Yes.
substitute motion.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lee has the floor right now. We'll come back to you, Dr. Beebe.
I do think it is something we should consider, and therefore I will move that the 3 teacher organizations have a representative.
Have a second?
I would like to add LSBA representative to the 4.
That's what happened.
I will say,
And I'll second it, Mr. Lee.
I thought
Will
They
you
had
accept
a-
that, Mr. Lee?
I thought they had a representative. No.
So the four organizations.
I'm keeping it at 3. Now, if she wants to make
Mr.
another
Lee
motion.
is keeping it at 3, Dr. Beebe.
I second it.
If I may make comment, it is a difficult thing to try to limit, to some extent, membership so that you can have a workable committee and not a sideshow. However, I have no issue with Mr. Lee's suggestion. But you see the slippery slope that at what point do you draw the line? I will ask you to look at the membership, and I'm not disagreeing with Mr. Lee's motion. The variety of individuals included in this committee is a pretty wide variety of individuals that I originally suggested along with the superintendent. But I certainly respect Mr. Lee's ability to make that and wanted to make sure it was clear that I think he has the opportunity to do so.
I just want inclusion. That's all.
Thank you. We will vote on that after we hear from the rest of the comments. Joyce Haynes.
You're not going
Joyce Haynes, President of the Louisiana Association of Educators. I come to you with a heavy heart because had the card been red or green or a discussion like that of the legislature where you had to let them know if you support or not, I know that the audience or your body, we get to speak before you vote. And I had a different, I'll say a different argument prepared. So now that you have a substitute motion, I'm still hearing an exclusion of the school board. So I'll just speak for myself at this point. The Louisiana Association of Educators, the membership elects a president that is teaching in our classrooms. I have been on leave for 6 years, and by law, each year I've asked for a leave from St. Landry Parish. For 6 years, I have been here in Baton Rouge, and I have watched you, and there have been many days I have come in and I've gone out. And I will say to you that I've attended as many meetings and sat in as many as possible. I even called on Mary Washington when I could talk to Linda Johnson about representation for the LAE. Often enough, we bring to the table as much as possible. And I will just say,
Mr. Lee's motion, just for the sake of, let's move on.
You can, but we have comment cards, and generally we hear the comment cards before we vote. Ms. Haynes?
okay, I didn't get to hear, do I need to do something different?
He just says, he was saying he has no objection to the motion.
Yes.
So,
Okay, fine. And then I will just say I appreciate the thought that you will add us. I'm also very, very interested in you knowing everything that we possibly can bring to the table. So I will tell you, we bring the history of the accountability since and with every president that has come and gone. And then I'll end, because sometimes it's better to be quiet. I will also say to you that I appreciate anyone and everyone that comes and sit at this table. For if you sit here enough, you really will begin to believe that often enough, sitting and testifying and giving your best to the reasons why you believe in something, you leave with an even heavier heart when things don't change. And it was very important that I watch you make this change today and that you accept that motion. I will tell you how important it is, and then I'm done. It's not only important to me because I have spent 6 years here and I have to return to St. Landry Parish. And I wanted to say to you, if it was something I said, understand, it won't be me. If it was something I did, understand, someone will take my place and they will continue. But anytime something is flawed and something is wrong, we are activists. We are those who advocate for the best for our children. We have the knowledge. We have the expertise. And if you don't collaborate with the educators here in this state, we are doomed. And I will remind you, I have often said to you, I want you to remember my words. If you continue down the road with a flawed evaluation system, with morale being that low, and on the pretense of giving our teachers something other than the praise that they need for doing the best every day with the children of Louisiana, you make a sad mistake. From special ed and everyone else who has come to you today to express what they need and what they hear and what they feel, it should not fall on deaf ears. For we are those who are helping. And I will tell you, as the Teacher of the Year in Massachusetts has recently said in a speech, we are the Common Core. Teachers are the core of the being here. Teachers teach all professions, and they make a difference. And if you leave us out, you are doomed. And I appreciate you accepting that added to the motion. And you tell your child I'm not a witch.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes.
Might make one final comment. I don't know if people want to continue to comment. Obviously, they're welcome. You know, I have tried, quite frankly, to change some of our patterns. Some of those things I've done well, some I need to do better. I've never had an issue with people that come to the table and argue for their position. Never once. I don't agree with it all the time. And people underestimate the difficulty of trying to form a group that is both representative but somewhat limited so that we can get business done. I'm not a big believer in meeting just for the sake of meeting. So I don't object to Mr. Lee's, and again, I'm one vote at this moment, and there's a motion on the board, and I just wanted the other members to know I don't object in any way to Mr. Lee's motion.
Thank you, Mr. Romer.
I appreciate the comments.
Mr. Finney.
At the risk of nudging you a little farther down the slippery slope, I would like to suggest that you seriously consider having at least one mathematician in your group. There are some pretty complicated calculations that I'm not confident are done well. If you don't have a mathematician in the group and need one, I'll volunteer.
Thank you, Mr. Finney.
What I will suggest is that we certainly will include a mathematician and when appropriate, because it is a slippery slope. We'll get a long list of other people as well, so I appreciate your comments.
Scott Richard.
Thank you, Ms. Bradford. I'll keep it very brief. Scott Richard, Executive Director of the Louisiana School Boards Association. Thank you, Ms. Beebe, for your earlier request and earlier attempted motion to include the School Boards Association as a member of this committee. Don't want to keep going down that slippery slope. We are very cognizant of the fact that in the past, recommendations and suggestions by the Accountability Commission were not taken into consideration by this body, and we would just hope that whoever serves on this commission provides meaningful input, and that sincerity in the input that is provided is adhered to by you all, the elected officials and appointed officials that serve on this esteemed board of elementary and secondary education. We would certainly welcome a position to offer. We think we have some input that would be meaningful on this particular commission. However, we understand the old cliche that it's good government when the politics are on your side, and it's bad politics when they're not. So we would respectfully request your consideration to include the School Boards Association as a part of this commission, as it has been in the past. However, we certainly understand the rationale that's been presented to us today. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion. Would you please restate Mr. Lee's motion?
Yes, ma'am. Just for expediency, I'll just read the names and not their positions and titles and where they're from and all that other stuff. But what I believe Mr. Lee's motion was to approve the appointment of the following individuals to the Accountability Commission, and those recommended by Superintendent White are Carol Price, Judy Vale, Mickey Landry, Patrice Pujol, Giselle Juneau, and Andrea Martin. Those recommended by BESE as amended would be Dr. Sandra McCalla, John Bennett, Brady Thomas, Brett Duncan, I believe it is.
I think you're correct.
Stephanie DeSalle, Bridget Nealon, Lori Carlton, Kyle Faulting, Dr. Jean Burns, and a representative of the Louisiana Association of Educators, a representative of the Louisiana Federation of Teachers, and a representative of the Associated Professional Educators of Louisiana.
It's Brandy Thomas. I don't know if you said Brandy Thomas correctly or not.
Where, say again?
It's right in the book,
Brandy
so if you're getting it
Thomas.
out of the book, it's fine.
Yes, yes, Brandy Thomas.
Members, Heather Cope, Executive Director of BESE. If I can just clarify, we don't need to include the superintendent's names in his nomination because you all empowered him to appoint folks.
Okay.
So those are just on.
Okay.
For adding the 3 reps, I think it'll be helpful just going forward if you all intend for those to be just automatic placements and the association owns those, or if those are going to be voted on by the board every time we do new membership based on recommendations either from the state superintendent or the board president, or however the mechanics of that, so we can have it in line with the rest of the commission membership.
I would think whatever we do, we would also want to do for the Association of Principals, because as Mr. Lee pointed out, that might be a position that changes.
Okay, so the rep for the Association of Principals is one of the superintendent's appointments as in a principal slot.
Heather, point of order. I think we need to pass this motion first, and then we can.
Oh, we will need
add
that in the motion.
So tell me again what you think we need.
Okay.
So
So either
either-
substitute motion.
Just
Or
amending,
an amendment.
clarifying the motion on how you want those 3
Somebody make the amendment.
association reps to be appointed. Either just naming them outright, so LFT, LAE, Apple will always have a seat on the commission, or if they are based upon the nomination and confirmation by the president or the
Until
superintendent.
amended, that's the way it should read.
Okay, so they'll have a standing seat. All right.
So we need an amendment to this motion to make that happen.
Or if Mr. Lee could
I'll
clarify.
just include representatives of LAE, LFT, Apple.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And they can fight about who they're going to appoint.
So we have a motion on the floor with a proper second. Do I hear any objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Next item.
Next item is 6.1, page 37. Consideration of revisions to non-public bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for Non-Public School Administrators regarding the approval of Montessori schools. The department recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
So moved. Second. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Any comments, questions, cards? Angela Leaf. She passes. Suzanne Bassett. Suzanne Bassett. I'm sorry, it does. It says LMA wishes to thank Adam Hoff and Marion Schutte for support and work with LMA. Pam Mason, or Masson? Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
Okay, next item is item 7.1 on page 39. Consideration of public comments received regarding Bulletin 135, Health and Safety, and revisions to Bulletin 135, Health and Safety, Section 307, Diabetes Management and Treatment. The department recommendation is to receive the summary of public comments regarding Bulletin 135, Section 307, direct BESE staff to proceed with the final adoption of the April 20th, 2013 Notice of Intent regarding revisions to Bulletin 135, and approve as a new Notice of Intent additional revisions to Bulletin 135, Section 307, as presented by the LDE.
So moved. Second.
Ms. Bradford, can I just make one quick point?
Sure, let's get this on the record.
I promise
You
it's
got
quick
it?
but necessary.
All right.
Bridget Devlin with the department. This policy needs to be jointly promulgated between BESE and then also Louisiana Board of Nurses. They approved this policy earlier, or last week, adding the word nurse to the end. They want, if you look on page 41, they would like the new policy to say received by the school nurse. The American Diabetes Association and the School Nurses Organization both have spoken in support of this change. These changes were based on the American Diabetes Association comments. So everyone, with the exception of this board right now, is in favor of that change, and we are asking that you amend the motion to approve as amended with the word.
Becky, do you accept that amendment?
Yes, and
Thank you.
Ms. Armstrong,
Yes.
thank you. We have a motion. Or any other comments or questions? We have a motion on the floor. Any objections to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Next item is item 7.2, page 45. Consideration of public comments regarding Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators, relative to disciplinary regulations and technical revisions. The department recommendation is to receive the summary of public comments and agency response regarding Bulletin 71, authorize the LDE staff relative to disciplinary regulations and technical revisions, authorize the LDE staff to make technical revisions as necessary, direct BESE staff to proceed with the final adoption of the May 20th, 2013 Notice of Intent regarding revisions to Bulletin 741, and approve as a new Notice of Intent additional revisions to Bulletin 741, Section 1301, Disciplinary Regulations as presented by the LDE.
So moved. Second. We have a motion and a second. Ms. Devlin, do you have any comments? All right. Any comments from the board? Questions? We have one public comment. Lee Barrios. She passes. We have a proper motion and a second. Any objections to this motion? Motion is approved. Thank you so much. I believe that is our last item. Thank you very much for your comments and for your patience. This